Welcome everybody to this seminar. I just want to give a bit of an introduction to the Research and Policy series first. So myself and Professor Boyle here have been working really on the links between the research underway in Maynooth and policy making, whether it's locally or nationally and indeed internationally, and at the various practices. And one aspect of that we've been seeking to do is to have a series of engagements where we can showcase examples of academics and researchers in Maynooth working with policymakers to talk through what they've been involved with, but also to understand the various aspects of that involved and their perceptions about it and how they feel about it and what they've learned. So we have a series of 5 engagements here, and this is the first of the 5, and they're taking place over the next couple of months. And we are running these on a hybrid basis. So we have a number of people here in the room with us in the Aedín building in Maynooth, and you're all very welcome. You're over far. And then we have a number of people online, some from Maynooth, some from other universities, and some from the public service, and you're all very welcome as well. So the way we're working this today is that we're opening up the chat function online. So that if anybody wants to make a comment that we can then read and share in terms of questions when we get to that stage and so on, could you please do that? But we aren't actually putting up dialogue online, so it's easier to manage it just with the chat. So that's where we're at with the series. And myself and Mark have also got a few published papers and so on about this topic, and we've undertaken a lot of work within Maynooth with people here about their perceptions of researchers working with policymakers and how we can improve those arrangements and so on. And we're very engaged on those fronts. So turning to today's seminar, really thrilled to welcome Dr. Aedín Doris, who is the head of the economics department here at Maynooth University, and also Roshin Sen, who's from the Department of Social Protection. So these two had worked together on the Pensions Commission, where Roshin was the secretary to the Pensions Commission, and Aedín was one of the members with an academic background. And as well as that, Roshin, in her day job, you're chief analyst in the Department of Social Protection, and a long history of really at the interface between, I suppose, research and policy making. I've chatted to Roshin before. She was in the unit within FOSS, which is, I think, very innovative in the public sector in terms of bringing research findings to public policy, and has brought that through since that part of FOSS integrated into social protection. And obviously she hasn't stayed in the unit, but she's gone on and done other things, and that's great. And Aedín is here, and she's a particular, you've been here for quite a while now, 1997. Yes. You're a particular expert in labour market economics and so on, and somebody in the economics of education and so on, and has been a prominent figure in debates around these issues, and has also got a history of engagement, if you like, in terms of linking in research underway with policy making. That includes working with ITIS, the Government's Economic and Advisory Service, Pensions Commission, and also being managing editor of the Economic and Social Review. So we have 2 people who are very active in different domains, and we're going to hear from them, and then we're going to have a bit of open discussion here in Maynooth, but also with the comments online. So over to the 2 of you, and thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much. So I'll start off and just give a background as to what the Pensions Commission was about and what the challenge was that we had to deal with. So if you cast your mind back like 5 years ago, we were coming up to an election, so we're at a very similar time span as we are now. And one of the issues that emerged as becoming quite topical was the issue of the state pension age. So during the course, just in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, there had been there used to be a state pension transition that had been abolished in 2014, and also then which had the impact of increasing the state pension age to 66. And at the time also, we'd introduced legislation that would increase the state pension age to 67 in 2021 and then to 68 in 2028. And so as we were in 2019 going into 2020, this increase in the pension age was suddenly becoming, at the time, there hadn't been much of a discussion around it because there were many other things happening to be concerned about. But as the deadline approached, it became more of an active issue. So there was quite an active campaign, very effective in terms of it was very snappy. It was like Stop 67. It was backed by the unions, by SIPTU, by Age Action, National Women's Council of Ireland. So like a number of different organisations behind it. And as you can see, as an example of it, there'd be just basically saying around, you know, people expecting to be able to retire and then being continued to either have to continue to work or else to go on the dole. So this is the concern that people had raised. So as a consequence, so it became such an issue that when following the election, it took a number of months before there was a government formed. But when it came to establishing or setting out the programme for government, there was a commitment put within the programme for government that a commission on pensions would be established, and that this would look at the sustainability of the state pension system and the social insurance fund that funded it. And so it said this commission would look at things like the qualifying age, like the total contribution, like an approach to calculating what pension you'd get. It would look at the contribution rates and other eligibility criteria. So there's a number of different aspects that the programme for government committed that this commission would look at. It also said in the interim period, until such a time that the commission reported that the increase to the state pension age would be deferred. So they took out the legislation for increasing it to 67 and 68. And the commission was given a timeline of reporting to government by June 2021, and that then the government would then respond within 6 months thereafter. So that was what was committed in the programme for government. And then I suppose in terms of the challenge that the commission was trying to address, I suppose we're all aware of the fact that people are living for longer and that this has a consequence in terms of the number of older people in the population. And so this is, if you're interested in these infographics, they're on the Pensions Commission website still. And so you can see the forecasts at the time were that the population, that the working age from 2021 out 30 years to 2051, that the working age population would increase slightly. So first is that the life expectancy would increase. So back in 1961, female would live to 72, and by 2051, they'd have a life expectancy of 88. So that's quite an extensive increase in life expectancy. So then the number of people, the number of working age people were estimated to increase by about 9%, just a small amount, but the number of people at 65 and over are estimated to more than double from about 750, almost 750,000 to over 1.5 million. So the reason this matters is that the way that our state pension system is funded is that it's funded through the social insurance fund, and where people who are working, they pay for the pensioner. So anyone who's working now, your PRSI contributions go into a big pot, and that pot is then paying out pensions. So that's fine when back in the first one there in 1991, you had 5 working age for every pensioner, but already we've dropped down to about 3.5 people, and we're looking at less than 3 people, so more like 2.3 working age people for every pensioner by the time we hit 2051. That's not too far away. So then when you're looking at this, you're looking at the burden that will be paid on that'll land on working age people to fund pensions for older people is actually quite extreme. And then looking at it from an expenditure point of view, you're looking at the proportion of expenditure as a proportion of GNI star increasing from 3.8% in 2019 and forecast to increase to 5% by 2030 and to 7.9% by 2050. So you're looking at an increasing proportion of the money in the economy being spent on pensions. And then you're also looking at the deficit in the social insurance fund increasing as well over time. So you're looking at, there was a deficit of, an estimated deficit of 2.3 billion in 2030, and then going up to 13.4 billion in 2050. And just to say that's not a cumulative figure, that's an annual deficit figure. So you can see that the scale of the problem is quite extensive. And so we had our work cut out for us anyway, in terms of trying to be able to establish a system that would be sustainable. So that was the job given to the commission. And just to give you a sense of the workload that was involved in terms of the time commitment that was given by members around this, there was 11 members in the commission. We've had our first meeting in November of 2020, and out until July 2021, we had 18 plenary meetings where the commission as a whole met. But we also had a technical working group that was set up, and so which Aedín was also a part of, which produced 4 different technical papers looking at population and labour force projections, looking at state pension expenditure, looking at the poverty prevention effects of the state pension, and also benchmarking and indexation of pension rates. So they were the kind of other topics that we did papers on. We also had, excuse me, quite extensive consultation. We had a number of people come in to speak and present to the commission, going from the Department of Finance, the IFAC, the ESRI, who else did we have? National Women's Council of Family Carers in terms of the long-term carers. We had a couple of other things added to apart from what's in the programme for government, we had two other things added to the workload of the Commission. One was looking at introducing a pension for long-term carers of incapacitated dependents, and the other was looking at the issue of mandatory retirement ages in employment contracts. So we had two other aspects as well. As if we didn't have enough to do at the first instance, we might as well add a bit more. But they were all related, so it made sense. And then we also had a public consultation process. So we had over 200 submissions from individuals and organisations. And we also did a survey because we're conscious that a lot of people wouldn't respond to a submission. So we had over 1,100 responses to the survey as well. So there's analysis of all of that. We also had a stakeholder event day. So we had speakers from the National Women's Council of Ireland, from Age Action, and from who was the other one? I think the carers were Valley Carers, and yes, so we had an IBEC and SIP too as well. So we had a number of different speakers at that, and the OECD in terms of what was happening in overall trends. So so that was the kind of the workload of what we were doing in the time that we had. Our deadline was June. We did get the work finished in June, but then we got the report finalised just in terms of actually getting it all written up properly and submitted to the Minister in September, and it was published in October. So that's kind of I suppose, the overall background in terms of the work that we did. And so we're going to go on to then, how did we get involved?
Yep. I received an email asking if I take a phone call from Tim Duggan, who's Assistant Secretary in Social Welfare, about the Pensions Commission, and I've never worked on pensions, so I thought, okay, this could be interesting. So he rang me and said, we're thinking of inviting you onto the Pensions Commission. How would you feel about that? Like I said, I've never worked on pensions. I've worked on labour supply, and of course, retirement age is an aspect of labour supply, but this seemed very far. And so my immediate reaction was, I don't think I'm the right, why would you be asking me? So, so what he said was that what they needed was somebody who was a gender expert, and that's true. I've worked a lot on gender aspects of the labour market. So I went, okay, that sounds a bit reasonable, but I asked lots of questions about how the commission would work, who was going to be on it, and one of the problems was that you can get very little information because, of course, before everything is agreed, nothing is agreed. So he said, we're talking to an extremely competent chairperson. I think you'll be very happy with this person. Okay, that turned out to be Josephine Feely. You couldn't have asked for better, really. I mean, when I heard, that was very reassuring. Josephine Feely had been for those of you who don't know her, had been head of the Revenue Commissioners and also the Policing Authority, and had, I think, established a reputation for being pretty forthright if she thought something was out of order about speaking up about it. So that was really good. But at that stage, she couldn't say that. All he could say was that it was going to be somebody really good. He couldn't tell me who the other members of the commission was. He could tell me, that there were going to be representative members and so on. So it was a bit of, so to be honest, my initial reaction was, this sounds like a lot of work for kind of something that, I haven't directly worked on. It's not my research area directly, and I was humming and hawing about it. But after thinking it over a bit, I decided, well, it's clearly a really important issue, what happens to pensions. And it's true that I do know quite a lot about gender aspects of the labour market. And it's good that people who know about things are on these commissions rather than people who don't. And so I better put my money where my mouth is, kind of thing, and accept. So I did accept. One thing I should say is that Tim, so I asked him how much work would be involved, and he said, we're probably looking at monthly meetings. That was not the case. Pretty quickly. So Josephine Feely, one of the things about Josephine is that she was, they want this report in 6 months. We're getting it done in 6 months. And that meant we had fortnightly meetings. Those meetings were mostly half day, although towards the end, they were full day meetings. And the technical committee meetings on top of that, which that structure of having the working group in the background only emerged once we'd started our work. We realized we were going to need that subcommittee, and it was, I think it was right that I was put on that I was asked to do that. That was extra work. That was, we had another 8 meetings of kind of, now they were shorter, they tended to be an hour or 2 hours max kind of thing. So that was how I got involved. And I think the reason I was asked, okay, Tim said, we know that we've been told that you're, an expert on, gender aspects of the labour market. But I don't think it was just that. I think, when I look back on it, I had been, without really making a conscious move to do so. I had been kind of putting myself out there in policy area for several years. I had got involved in the Castle's report on higher education funding, so a completely separate issue, in 2016. And because of that, I started getting invitations. So that was something that I just, something that I cared about. I organised a conference, it ended up that I was getting, I got involved in the Castle's review itself. I started getting asked to do other things then, you know, so the impression I have is that once you kind of demonstrate that you're open for public engagement, it kind of comes. I got invited to go on SISI Council the Statistical and Social Inquiry Society of Ireland, which is actually a learned society, but very policy engaged. A lot of policy makers would be involved in. Yeah, so there were a few things like that. And then when I took on the editorship of the ESR that Seán mentioned, so I think that there was also a sense that I was somebody who was interested in public policy, and that I might be, for that reason, I might be a good person to approach. So that was how I got involved. Now that you, Roshin.
Well, I suppose it's different in the civil service because you're just told that you're going. But I also didn't expect that I would be involved. I was head of the Automatic Enrolment Programme Management Office at the time, and like, you know, the pensions side, we're talking about the Commission on Pensions and the terms of reference, and you know, the type of membership that you'd need, what type of groups you'd want to have covered, and you know, when you're speaking about something and you don't think you're going to work on it, you have a very different perspective than when you know it's going to be you. So that was quite the shock then when I got the call and told it was like, because I suppose at that stage I appreciated what was going to be involved in the work. And then once we started trying to do, I suppose before we met, we were trying to do the work plan of how do we cover all these topics in the time that we have to be able to deliver a report. And that's when we saw, you know, you're starting with people. So in terms of the membership, we were looking at people who we wanted to have employer and union groups represented. We want to have older people and younger people represented. We want to have somebody who understood the labour market. We wanted somebody who understood the fiscal sustainability side of it as well. People who were policy experts, people who had kind of other perspectives around maybe like being self-employed. So like these different types of views. But yeah, people with differing levels of knowledge about pension. So you have to start from the very beginning of saying, this is how the state pension works. And like, so, you know, the initial meetings were really just to be able to set people up so they understood what was happening. Like, so you have the foundation to be able to go into the work of it afterwards. So yes, so I got the call, and then we just got into it at that stage. It was very, and I suppose the other aspect of it as well was because of COVID is that we couldn't have in-person meetings. Yeah. So everything was being done online. So when you're trying to get a commission together and to be, so for the chair, Josephine was absolutely excellent. That's a very challenging endeavor, because you're looking at people who you're trying to get people to gel, but you're all online. You can't have side conversations. You can't have, you know, you can't have a bit of a coffee and get to know somebody. And so it was quite an unusual situation to be trying to do this work.
And the work did definitely, now that I think it was partly because the stage we were at, when we could finally move to in-person meetings, the work went so much more quickly. It was so much easier to communicate. If you could see somebody's reaction when you said something, and you could kind of address if you thought they'd misunderstood, it was really informative about how in-person stuff works better. Yeah,
for sure. So we go on to the how did working together impact policy?
So yeah, so I can talk a bit about this. So these were kind of our main recommendations, and I've put kind of ticks and crosses and one question mark. So there were a few things that the government pretty much immediately, you know, in a very quick timeline, I think within a few months, had got together and said, okay, these are things we'll definitely do. So there was deferred access to pension. So if people want to keep working past 66, they can, and they'll be, and their entitlements will build up while they're continuing to work. So if they haven't hit the threshold for the full payment of pension, that'll keep building up. So that was, you know, not a very difficult thing. People didn't have to do it. Politically, it wasn't a difficult thing to implement. People didn't have to do it, but if they wanted to do it, it was good. Enhanced provision for long-term carers. So this was that there was a particular issue with the way the qualification criteria worked, that somebody who was full-time caring for somebody for a substantial part of their working years, potential working years, were being cut out of the contributory pension, and that was, you know, I mean, all we had to do, there was nobody who objected to that as an idea. It was just a matter of how best to do it, and so that was what we had to discuss there. So that has come in. Gradual increase in PRSI rates, promise, maybe I'll come back to that. The total contributions approach phase-in was begun, so that was there was a switch over happening in the method of calculation of contributions to kind of get rid of cliff edge kind of thresholds that people had to read. That was actually penalising women more than anyone, I think, and although the phase-in was a bit tricky for some particular groups of women. So anyway, there was some kind of technical stuff to sort out there. That's been introduced. And legal changes to allow longer working. So yeah, that's part of the deferred access. That was tied up with the deferred access thing. But the two biggest issues that so basically what we said was that, you know, the government faces choices. We're not going to tell you which one to do. If you increase the pension age, you will still have to increase contribution rates, but you won't have to increase them as much. And it's a matter of balance. So you either increase contribution rates a lot, or you increase them less and increase the pension age. And the choice is yours. I think it's fair to say that most of the Commission favoured increasing the pension age, barring one member. But you know, we also were conscious that this was fundamentally a political choice about what you know, how politicians represent the preferences of the people, and so there has been no change to the state pension age, and I think it's clear that that's not going to happen in the next few years anyway. So the gradual increase, so this relates then to the gradual increases in PRSI pension rates. So there has been a small increase, 0.1% of the came in this year's budget for both employer and employee contributions. But there were some other kind of increases that we had flagged as necessary, and there's been no discussion that I've heard. Now maybe you've heard differently, Roshin, from the insider point of view, but particularly the one for self-employed people. Self-employed people pay the employee rate, but they get, and the justification for that when it was first introduced was that they actually got very little benefits. They weren't entitled to job seekers benefit, for example, and they weren't entitled to sick pay, and they weren't entitled to various other things that other PRSI receivers were, but that gradually, basically their rights have been increased in the direction of having more or less the same rights as everybody else. And for an employee, they make their own contributions, but the employer also makes a much more substantial contribution towards that fund, and that doesn't occur for self-employed people. So we had recommended pretty strongly that that would increase in the direction of, at least in the direction of the employer rate of contribution. There were some people who argued that it should be the employer and the employee added together, but we decided not to go for that. There's no discussion of that. I haven't heard any discussion of any serious discussion of that, even though we weren't the first to recommend that. Oh yeah, the other thing was that we recommended that PRSI be payable by people who were working, who were over 66, and on occupational pension, now not on the state pension, but on occupational pension receipts, that would be subject to PRSI in the same way as other employment income. And I haven't heard any discussion of that. Maybe you can update us again. So some of them. So I think it's so far what's happened is that the fairly uncontroversial policy measures have been implemented, and there's been a promise on the gradual increases for PRSI rates, but I don't think we solved the problem of having the more politically difficult recommendations implemented. So that would be my take on. The last one was one that I was particularly keen on, a standing body to recommend on pension rates. There's a kind of a very ad hoc way of deciding on the pension, the rate of pension payable. And if you look at the Low Pay Commission is now a standing body that makes recommendations, makes kind of unbiased deliberations on the appropriate rate of the minimum wage. and makes that recommendation to government. It's kind of a separate body to some extent, and we thought that it would be a good idea to have something similar for pension rates, and that hasn't happened. So that's the take on what's happened so far, I would say, in terms of our policy impact.
And just on that one, I suppose that what the government decided on for the rate was that the department would tell them what the calculated rate would be based on the approach that was in the Programme for Social Inclusion and that the Commission recommended, but it's as an input into the budget process. So that kind of fed into them as part of the budget process. But like I said, it's not a separate entity.
And it's not publicly, that wouldn't be publicly. So the nice thing about the Low Pay Commission is that it makes a kind of a public recommendation. Okay, it does go to government, but it's also published what that recommendation is. And so that, that doesn't happen.
And just I suppose maybe tied to the legal changes one is around the retirement contracts one about the retirement age.
Yes.
And so that wasn't in our department, that was kind of being led by Detty. So they did do a heads of bill, and then that went to pre-legislative scrutiny as well. So in terms of, the recommendation was that a person couldn't be compelled to leave before the state pension age. And so it's gone to pre-legislative scrutiny, but it hasn't progressed entirely through, but at least there's been progress made in the legislation for that as well.
Yeah, and one thing about the membership of that we did have a lawyer, Aedín Mangan, on the I mean, she's also self-employed, but she was really useful, so we really had some really good experts on the panel to help with that kind of thing. She was really useful there.
The next question. Yes.
I think you probably have more to say on this, because from the point of view of somebody who was sitting on the commission, we didn't have any discretion about how it worked. You know what I mean? We were like, you're on the commission, these are the meeting dates, this is the work that's required. I mean, obviously, the only thing I would say is that, anybody who's sitting on a commission, if you have any choice, you do it in person. But again, that wasn't a choice that we had, so that was just the times that was in it, and we all remember the various impacts of that. So from my point of view, there was nothing particularly I would have done differently, because
no, I think from my point of view, and I suppose I'm conscious of that, I'm coming from the point of view being like the secretary to a commission, more to see how it was running and to get through the process of it in some ways. But I suppose it's tied into what Aedín was saying, is just I think the range of perspectives that we have from the commission was extremely helpful. Like I think if we didn't have, so say the technical group, so I suppose if you're going back to what I was saying earlier about that people with very different backgrounds, and so people having a higher or lower level of understanding of some of the more technical issues. So I think having the technical working group, I suppose the reason that it was suggested that was created was to have a group of people who were more expert in this to be able to go back to the main commission and say, okay, we've actually looked at all these figures and agreed on that, this is what like we agree on these population and labour force projections, we agree on what the state that the challenges in terms of expenditure. And this is what's the poverty prevention impacts of. So at least it meant that the commission, all the commission members didn't have to go through and probe every single figure and kind of have a discussion around it. Because I think if you don't have that foundation where you actually agree on what the facts are, then it makes it very difficult to come forward with recommendations. So I think that work of the group. So I definitely really appreciated the fact that, like, say, when we're looking at, like, say, projections from IVAC or something, the fact that you'd be like saying, what were the assumptions? Well, it's like really probing every single aspect of it to make sure that you're happy with it, because it meant then, at least when we went back to the commission, that we, like, any questions they asked, we looked into any possible thing, and also subsequently, if we're like probed by other departments or other people around, we knew that we'd looked at everything in a great amount of detail, so that was really reassuring, I think.
So in a lot of cases, just to explain, there were different figures coming at us, and all based on slightly different assumptions, and it was a matter of really understanding what the assumptions were. They were all reasonable if you were asking a particular question, but in general the numbers came from asking slightly different questions, and there were slightly different assumptions made, and drilling down and working out exactly where the differences came from was I mean, it was a bit of work, but it was worth doing, and you're right, it would have been absolutely tedious to do that with the whole commission. It would have been a nightmare.
I don't think we would have could have asked it, and we tried to bring all the members along with us on that one. And then I also think I think for the secretariat as well, it was just reassuring because we were looking at so many different things at the same time. So at least knowing that there were people who were like experts at something looking at it as well. So it wasn't a case of like, I have some background in labour market, so like I'm not like unfamiliar with it or like worried about it, but at the same time, just having somebody else just look in on it properly. It was just very reassuring to know that there wasn't like we didn't miss something. And so that was really reassuring. And it also just overall helped with the credibility of the work of the commission, because at least the membership reflected so many different views that it meant we weren't surprised then by other things that we heard outside, because all those views were being represented across the table or across the screen, I suppose, of the commission members. So I think that was really helpful for us, because if you have, I think people on the commission were quite, they were expert in the areas, they were very engaged. I think the chair was like great at that as well, but like the fact that the members were so engaged. Because without that, if you had people who were just like, oh yeah, that's fine, like people really quizzed and discussed everything that was on every meeting that we had.
True, yeah.
And if you don't have that, sure, we could just go and write something, you just don't know what people will say about it. So it really, like without that level of actual engagement with the process, I don't think the commission would have worked. At least we, and then because we had such an effective chair and other members as well, that we did.
And also, I have to say, Roshin, the secretariat was superb. You were leading, you know, I know it was mostly you, but the team that you had was, you know, really, I mean, so very early on, I became reassured by that, you know, there was really good work being done in the background to support the deliberations. That was brilliant.
And I should give a shout out then to like Casey and Louise and Brian and Max, who honestly, like, one of the things in terms of what we do differently, this is more of a thing that I learned for myself as opposed to for policy research work, is that I really hadn't anticipated how much work was going to be involved, even though I knew there's going to be a lot of work in terms of the resource requirements. So definitely it was like far more than I'd anticipated. And as we kept going, and so we have the technical working group, then we have the stakeholder events, and you're just looking at it going for each of these things, like even just the general organization, having the, like even being able to share files with people, like all those things. And then because we're independent, we were doing our own press office functions. So we were like getting crash courses on how to be press officers. So all of these things you're trying to do, and I hadn't. And so I think there's 3 of us initially. So like really that wasn't anywhere near the number of people that you needed. So for me, I've now recognized that you need people to be able to do this. It took me a while to realize that, but then once I did, it was just very reassuring to get more people. But other than that, yeah, I think it was just the time that was in it, like
yeah.
Like,
I mean, and we were given a very tight time frame,
Yeah.
you know, and
which
you know,
we
often you look at these commissions that take ages to report and you go, how could it take that long? But then when you see what's involved in getting a report out quickly, it was a pretty big ask. I mean, I don't at all regret doing it, even though it was far more work than I had anticipated. I really learned a huge amount, and so you know, I'm not saying that I would be urging people to sit on a commission whenever you have a chance, but you know, it is a really, really good experience, and a really yeah, I learned a lot about how policy making works. It's one thing standing on the outside and pontificating, and it's another thing being part of it. Yeah.
And I also think as well, just I suppose just when you're saying about some of them that they were quite politically easy for decisions to make, but operationally they're actually really challenging to do.
Yeah.
So like, you know, when we're going back to the department to say, well, we're looking like when the report was done to be able to say, like when you're looking at phasing in something over like a number of years with proportions, like it's like, so some of them are really quite complicated. And the deferred, what does that mean to accessing short-term payments? Like if you become unemployed, can you get jobs?
Yeah,
all those things have to be like so operationally they were quite challenging, even if we knew that they were good ideas to do.
Yeah, last I think funding and institutional arrangements. I think this is for me. So there is absolutely no doubt that participating in the commission affected my research. It was basically my research time that was being taken up by the commission. So in that sense, it was not good for my career. But I still stand over. I'm glad I did it. During the commission, and you might know a bit more about this actually, Roshin, one of the other commission members, so there's a rule, which I'm sure everybody knows about, that if you're being paid by the public sector, you can't be paid for something else by the public sector. Okay, you can't get 2 payments. So there was no payment to me or to Seán Coffey, who was the UCC person. I think we were the only 2 who were public sector. Yeah, but I was asked at some stage, and this is a bit oblique. I was asked, would I be interested, or would it be useful for the university to be funded for my time, or would that be possible? And I had never heard of this as a possibility. And I kind of sent a few emails, and that'd be great, especially if the money would go to the department, and then maybe I could get, you know, a module off next year or something to kind of try and make up my research time. I was trying to think of how it could be used. And I sent a few emails. I asked my head of department, she'd never heard of a mechanism for this. I sent a couple of emails and nothing ever came of it, and I didn't pursue it. And I kind of wish I had. So I think this is something that should be set up. And I think this should be said, you know, for something that's time consuming. I mean, obviously if it's only an ad hoc meeting kind of thing, it doesn't matter. But for something that's a kind of fairly substantial chunk of time, I think that's something that the public service should put in place as kind of automatic, or, you know, as the expectation at least, you know. And obviously Maynooth, you know, needs to have a mechanism for accepting those kind of payments. So you know, it would be a way of getting recognised within the university, and also, like I said, it could possibly have been used as a way of helping me to kind of get back on track again, you know. So that's one thing, and the other thing is, I know the promotions process is up for discussion at the moment, and I was involved. I went to one of the review sessions earlier this summer, and I think the impression I got from the review group was that they thought that something like the Pensions Commission would already be handled within the current frame, because, you know, there's a report at the end and you can point to the report as a research output. It's not really, it's a report of the commission as a whole. You're one member of it, but you can't really see which is your part. You can't point to it and say, I was the major author on, you know, that chapter. I mean, apart from the fact that, you know, you probably weren't. you know, it's not legally acceptable. You know, the Pensions Commission sits as a body and everybody has to take responsibility for all the work. So it's not really a publication. And the other thing is that there are some jobs, not the Pensions Commission now, but there are some jobs, advisory roles, where there is no publication at the end that you can point to, but it's still time consuming. It still takes from your research time. You know, I mean, you know, we all know that what we do is, you know, it's teaching first, you know, whatever it may is necessary second, you know, and whatever is left over is for all the other stuff, you know, and research is hopefully a big part of that. So, you know, I think a way of building that recognition of time, if the university is serious about trying to encourage us to engage in policy work, I think that's something that's important. I'm not sure of what mechanism you'd use, but I do think that needs to be considered.
And just on the funding side, so there is scope within, so we check with Depender rather than deeper at the time, on making payments. So it is possible to make a payment to the institution, but I just don't know what happens to it once the institution gets it. So where it goes, whether they just exactly. Whether it just comes off other money that they're going to get from government. Otherwise, I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
You know, that kind of I'm not sure what. So maybe that if there's going to be more clarification around that.
That would be good. Yeah. I think that's all we have to say.
Okay. Well done. My first comment is, well, we could listen to you all day, because the interaction between the pair of you is really interesting, and much better than hearing one person and then the other. But the team nature of what you've done together really shone through there. So it's a fair play to you for doing that, and the discursive style that you had made it very relaxed. So well done. This is a hugely interesting area. It's just one example of an academic researcher getting involved with a commission in this kind of haphazard way. I really describe, not quite, but not from your point of view, haphazard, obviously a planned way in the department. But there are other ways, there are working groups and a whole series of other ways academics can get involved in different things. But this is probably as high an example as there can be, if you like, of getting involved in one. So, and obviously has been a hugely enjoyable experience, but also worthwhile and professionally in making an impact, although you don't want to over describe that impact, but obviously you feel that you've contributed. So I'm going to open it up to the floor and to comments online as well. So anybody in the room wish to have any questions or comments? Well, okay.
Hi, Elaine McCarthy from the Research Office.
Hold on just 1 second. We get yeah. Like that.
Sorry, Elaine McCarthy from the Research Office. It struck me as you were talking, and I think you've answered really both of my questions here in that final slide around the time commitment for this seemed enormous. And I wondered as you were speaking whether or not you were funded for that. And I definitely would support a mechanism to make that happen. And I do believe that the Research Office can support that and talk to the department about how that might be done. And then the other point was around the technical papers. So there was 4 technical papers, I think you mentioned, and again, that issue around authorship and getting recognition for that. And, is there space to start thinking about a sort of a platform or a database for academics who contribute to these initiatives to get that recognition, maybe in a different light, if that makes sense? Mm-hmm. So I guess your thoughts on that.
So you mean to use the material for...
Yeah, like
research work, or to have it acknowledged as a separate authorship? Is that what you had?
Acknowledged as research that you have carried out, because it falls between the gaps. It doesn't go on to Scopus that gets pulled into our metrics, and yet it's very significant work that you're carrying out as a researcher. So do you have any thoughts on how that might work potentially in the future?
You might know more about the legal standing of the working papers. I mean, I did put the promotions application, but the truth is they weren't, they were, Roshin had a big input into them as well, as the secretariat, it was collaborative.
Yeah, it's kind of like there was almost like a supervisor role by the commission members, so that the secretariat would draft, but then you'd say, okay, what about this, and change and whatever. So there's definitely massive input by yourself and Seamus and Roma, but then I'm not sure how that's managed. I think we mentioned in them that this was done through the working group, and these are the members of the working group. So at least the working group members are mentioned, because there was definitely a massive extra workload on the working group members. I'm not sure. I don't know whether that paints is sufficient to say that this was produced under their guidance.
I just think something to think about to incentivize people to get more involved.
So what Elaine said there is that it's something to reflect on for the future as a way of this dilemma that you're talking about, the recognition for the academic.
Yeah. And I think just in particular for those ones where it's so tied into the area of expertise, that's where rather than a collective.
On that point, I actually was secretary to a commission as well in my experience a long time ago, a secretary to the commission on the point system, and Professor Anya Hyland was the chair, and we actually got a range of research papers published as well, but a long time ago, 25 years, so it's quite different. But we actually did the same in terms of consultation research papers, but we got those authored by researchers, so they would have been tendered for and authored by researchers, so that was quite clear. But while the work might have been overseen by the commission, so it was a slightly different model. But Anya as chair was obviously an academic member, chair of the commission, and it was hugely interesting.
Can I just follow up on that? Was there any scope, or was everything so confidential that you couldn't do this? Was there any scope to publish papers using the data that you collected for there? Was that expressly forbidden as one of the rules of participation?
Yeah, and in fact, I hadn't completely understood this. After the commission report came out, I was approached to do an opinion piece for the Irish Times, and I went, "Oh yeah, that's grand." And I just kind of mentioned that to somebody, is that, and I went back to, I don't know, was it Josephine or you or Tim? I can't remember who. I emailed somebody and said, just checking that that's okay. No, the commission speaks as one voice, and if you kind of break that coherence, then we're going to end up in trouble. If you have, different bits attributed to different members of the commission, you're going to run into trouble with it. And so that's just not.
Even the data, even taking the data and using.
Well, the data was all publicly available data, So, I mean, we weren't collecting data,
So you could use the data to work that up because it's publicly available, and do parallel work to come up with conclusions.
I'm not sure that would be appreciated. I remember the Pensions Commission came up with an alternative report afterwards, I mean, you do.
In other words, so stating at that point then in a different way, it does limit the amount to which you can comment and work on this particular area afterwards.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
you
true.
think- yeah,
That's true. Yeah.
And would for you to get to look, say, at pensions issues again, there would need to be a decent gap, I suppose, between your membership of the commission and.
I was looking at a pension issue using data that hasn't arisen by the time we reported, that would be okay.
Yeah.
I think as long as it wasn't a rehash of what we had done, I think that would be okay. I don't think I'd need to ask anybody's permission to do that.
Yeah.
And you know, I certainly know a lot more about pensions now than I did beforehand, so it's not impossible, you know.
Well, exactly, if you spent all that time learning
Yeah.
about pensions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you'd imagine at this stage as well, just given the decisions that have been made by government now in response to the Pensions Commission's report. So like, you'd imagine at this stage, now I'm saying that, never mind, I think that's something I would be, that enough time has passed, that other work would be, you know, given that the decisions have been made already.
Yes, yeah.
So on the recognition, we have one comment from Aedín Doris, who's talking about the role of potentially of Research Ireland in looking at this issue further. And I think, I mean, within Maynooth, for example, this was one of the issues that was thrown into the review that has been taking place, if you like. If there was already, if there's already some recognition, the question is it one of the areas that could get more recognition? Has that review reported yet? Wasn't there somebody appointed to chair a group in that regard? A former members.
Jim Walsh.
Jim, and has maybe fed into an
the
update.
promotions review.
Yeah.
No, I think they're still working on
Okay,
it.
yeah, so this is an issue for that.
I think they were trying to work on it pretty quickly, so I don't know, okay, you might know what the status of it now, you don't.
I wouldn't comment on this, but I think there was an initial engagement, but I think another set of engagements with the university community is planned.
Okay, yeah.
So, but there's a system issue above that. This is a key issue that is reflected on a continuing basis. And I think at the sort of DFARS Research Ireland level, it is an area that is appropriate for reflection, especially as the movement of academics might be increasing, and there may be commission membership or the other areas we're exploring at these seminars. People have been based in departments for a while. How those experiences are recognised, and how people are encouraged to do them so that it supports the development of their career as opposed to maybe detracting from their career.
I mean, one of the problems is that when you look at the league tables, you know, I mean, that this kind of work isn't taken into account at all. It's all, you know, scopes, publications, and, you know, international co-authorships and stuff like that, you know. So if you're working on a domestic policy issue, you know, it's not helping the university's rankings, you know. So,
but there is a reputation aspect to some of the rankings that it can help there.
That's true, but if possibly only if it's got an international remit. If it's a domestic remit, I'm not sure how much that would feed in, you know. So I think that's just a kind of strategic decision that the university has to take.
Just to comment on this and then ask a question.
I'm gonna bring you the microphone.
Sorry, I'm rated at like a hazard.
Just back to the issue of league tables, Times Higher Education Impact has some, in fairness, very small opportunity to account for the university engagement with local and national and international policymakers. It is like, if you look at metrics, it's a tiny percentage and you have to be in a particular space, so it has to be framed really carefully, but it exists. So like, when we're not part of it, but you know, there are places where this is starting to emerge, and this is something that we might look more carefully maybe in the future. But yeah, not in the traditional university rankings, you wouldn't see that, definitely. Question back to the time spent on this. So there was obviously a lot of time spent in the meetings. What was a kind of additional time requirements between the meetings? Were you, because often when we look at the committee work, we're just mentioning how many times you meet, but what is the amount of invisible work of reading and writing drafts between that? So how would you assess this in this particular case?
Oh, I didn't tot it up, but of course there was preparation for every meeting we would get, and especially at the beginning, actually, because we were all getting up to speed on the real nitty-gritty of the pension system, both the contributory and, you know, non-contributory pensions and how they interacted, and, you know, history of various payments, and there was a lot of reading to be done. In terms of writing, most of it are commenting in detail on documents. Most of it was for the technical committee work. So that was, you know, that really involved, like, you know, sometimes I was driving Roshin Sen with, you know, where does that number come from? You know, coming back and forth about, you know, I don't see where that, you know, anyway, it's clarifications and that kind of thing. I never added it up, but you know, yeah, it was.
We had a lot of, oh, sorry, I was just going to say as well that you also did feedback on the draft reports then as well.
That's true.
So
Yes,
that was
yes,
in
that's
in terms
true.
of going through all of that and comments and
Yeah.
even working out like how best to order it, I think.
Yeah.
Like in terms of like just how the structure of the report works.
I forgot that stuff. Yeah.
Can I just keep the folks online engaged with the conversation? So I've got some comments here. I'll just bundle them together. Maybe if you could take them, see if you can take them together. So Ray Griffin is interested in asking about qualitative data and whether or not commissions like this are mainly interested in expertise around quantitative analysis. What's the status of? Is the age-old question of how important qualitative research in how much is it valued by policy communities? John O'Connor then asks what weight the academic technical inputs had in the final decisions of the commission. So could maybe Roshin reflect on whether the status of the academics, it might only been two, yourself and Seamus, what status that carried, and for Aedín, any reflections on your independence in light of, say, your op-ed experience when taking on a role like this? You indicated you could be as forthright as you wanted, but do you feel like your academic integrity wasn't in any way, shape or form impaired or constrained by being on the commission?
I'm just building on that. Teresa Brophy in Research Ireland has asked, aside from the time commitment, were there any challenges or unexpected issues as an academic working in the policy space? So that's a few different comments or questions there, I suppose, for the two of you.
Maybe I'll go to those ones first. I felt I could say whatever I thought. I didn't feel constrained in that. But you have to accept that you're just one member of a commission, and that it can be difficult. You know, as academics, we're often pretty sure that we know the right answer to things, you know. But you end up having to take on board that, well, other people are putting, you know, different weights on different issues, and that we have to be realistic about that. So in that sense, it was a bit frustrating, but it was more that it was an adjustment that I had to make mentally. Like, it wasn't the case that if I said, no, the correct answer is 10, that everybody would go, all right, 10, you know, that was, you know, there was more to it. I know, you know. So, you know, and, you know, after, you know, a little while in the commission, you kind of went, oh, if only we had, you know, we were given, not narrow, but like, our terms of reference were pretty specific, you know, so we couldn't think about the whole pension system in Ireland, you know, and after a couple of meetings, I was kind of going, God, I wish we could think about the whole pension system in Ireland, but you know, that wasn't the terms of reference. This wasn't what we'd signed up to. So we had to work within the bounds. And in that sense, you know, there was a bit of frustration there, but, you know, if they'd set up a commission on the whole pensions, you know,
We'd still be working on it.
we'd still be working on it, A, and secondly, it would never get implemented. You know, at least if you keep it fairly narrow, there's a chance that some of it is going to be implemented. So yeah, so I didn't have any problems with my independence. You know, I mean, you do have to accept that the report is the report of the commission as a whole, and that you don't agree with every single thing in it. But having gone through the process, you understand where the decisions come from. And I think that's as much as you can say. I was just going to about the qualitative data. You probably have more to say about that. the thing about qualitative data is that it takes ages to collect, and we were given 6 months, you know, so I don't know what your experience of using it in other contexts is.
Well, so I suppose it depends on whether the question is around qualitative data experts on the commission or the use of qualitative data by the commission. And I suppose in terms of the expertise on the commission, there would be people who would have a very good background in using qualitative data as well as using quantitative data. So we did have the mix on the commission. And then in terms of I suppose what we tried to do, so say we'd have the stakeholder event, we have the different civil society organisations come into us and speak to us about, so say when family carers were in talking about long-term carers, there was a lot of like, I suppose they were telling us a lot about different people that they come across, and you know, the stories around people and the circumstances people find themselves in. So I suppose those weren't decisions that were based on here's a figure on this and we're just looking at data. It was looking at people's lived experience and how is the pension system impacting them. We also did like gender equality proofing of all the different commitment proposals that we had to the back of it as well. So we weren't considering it just on like sustainability terms. We were looking at what's the gender impacts, what are the quality impacts. So looking at different nationalities, ages, everything like that. So in the back, we did like a summary table of the different proposals, and then the ones that we didn't proceed with because the commission felt that this had too negative a gender impact or it had too bad intergenerational impact. So all of that was considered as well. So I think that we did, I think the commission, I'm saying we, and I'm the secretary, not a commission member. So the commission did take into account as wide a range of perspectives that they could, rather than just looking at sums around sustainability.
And actually, I was going to say, one thing that I was very impressed with Roshin and the secretariat team is that I realised that being in a government department, you actually hear a lot of the stories about what's going wrong. You know, you don't have to go out to other, a lot of the stuff wasn't news to you at all, that you had, you know about problems day to day in a way that maybe us as academics wouldn't, with the, the kind of nitty-gritty operation of a pension system. Yeah.
So that's probably, that's a fair point, because I think our department in particular, social protection, is very good at kind of engaging with, so we'd have the social inclusion forum where we'd have people from different organisations, but also people directly experiencing poverty or disadvantage come in and speak to policyholder and policy developers and ministers and everything like that as well, and the pre-budget forum. So we speak to loads of different groups and see submissions. So and then obviously we've got people on the ground as well. So between all of that, so I think that's there.
And that did come through.
And
yeah, for us, for commission members, it's one thing looking at how the system works on paper, but the interaction with the secretariat did help us to understand some of the issues.
What about the status of the academic input? I mean, I know you can always see otherwise with that. We're all thinking in environment, but what was this division of labour and how important were academic contributions in that?
So I think in fairness, I think the commission members all engaged on different areas, regardless of whether or not they were an expert on that particular area. So people would be discussing all the topics that came up, and it mightn't be an area that somebody has particular expertise in, but they have a perspective from their background. But I think and like I said, all the members were engaged and involved themselves in all the discussions and provided different perspectives. I think in terms of where people would kind of give way or kind of accept that an academic had more background was when it came to those specific topics, where if there was a discussion around, well, are these do we think this is real, in terms of what we're saying about the ratios over time, to be able to say, okay, we've looked at all these figures and this is, and just to have that kind of the expertise, but just the authority to be able to say, yeah, I'm confident that this is correct. And the same with James Coffey when it came to the fiscal sustainability side, to be able to say that's it. So people would then say, okay, you'd be in a better position to understand this particular topic than I would be. So I think in those particular areas of expertise, people would have been more kind of okay. And I think commission members would have turned to you then as well to say, okay, you'll be able to give a sense about this.
So for me, the stuff about it was the reports on, there was one of the reports was on poverty prevention, and another one was on the benchmarking and indexation of it. And those are things that I hadn't worked directly on the pensions issue, but I had worked on very similar issues in other contexts, and so that was, very interesting for me actually. Was and I found that stuff very easy to work on. I didn't have to do much, new reading up on that.
When did the commission have come out with it couldn't have done, reached the conclusions it reached without the academic input. It would have been a different set of recommendations. Do you think? Is it that important that it shaped the outcome of the?
I think that, I think we definitely needed those perspectives. We needed somebody, like we needed to be reassured and have that expertise on the commission for sure. I think without that, it would have been very difficult for the commission to have credibility in its findings. I think it really needed help with that, because otherwise if we came up with them without somebody with that background, like I think it just makes it easier to be able to.
I think
it
was not just for you, but also for the other commission members. I think they were reassured by the fact that we were independent of the secretariat and that we were saying, okay, well, this number makes more sense than this number, and we should, you know, I think it was as much for them as for the department.
Yeah, for sure. But I think the commission members, for like, yes, just having another source of authority rather than us saying this is what figures are.
So you've been describing a lot of behaviours. So what I'm wondering about is the extent to which there was a formal briefing document about the role of commission members and a formal briefing at the start, or was this all understood? If you know what I mean, because you've already described the bit that happened after and how you had to come to a sort of common understanding. But when the commission started, I doubt that any member was treated differently, but was there a briefing about a code of behaviour and all those sorts of things? Were they all in place?
Yeah, that was one of the first documents we had to draft. Actually, I think for the first meeting was like I forget what it's called, but something like principles or code of practice or something like that.
So you had to draft it, it wasn't available, even though the state obviously has had a number of commissions.
Well, you see, I think it does vary as to what it is that we're looking for in a commission as well sometimes, like whether we're looking at people being an individual representative and or whether they're representing an organisation and what we're expecting them to do when they participate in the commission. So I think we kind of needed to agree that with the chair as to how she saw the commission members operating, and just to have that clarity so people understood. And so and some people would have no experience with this type of work before at all. So just even basic things like, oh, you can't actually share the documents that we're discussing, you know, these are for you and not to be like circulated around for other odds from different people. It's your own. So yes, we had a document at the beginning and the chair went through at the first meeting. I think it was.
So there was clarity for everybody.
Well, I don't know if there was clarity.
So that might be different than, say, a more informal engagement with an academic, with a government department, which would be a conversation or a membership of a working group. It's a different thing, because of the formality of it, or indeed a membership of a corporate body. I chair a state body where there also is all these arrangements and codes of practice and codes of governance and so on behind. So the commission is sort of more like that than a working group.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions on the floor?
Okay.
Can I maybe say just a few words, and some of it might spark off some thoughts? Tremendous. I mean, what brilliant start to serious, lots of substantive things to take away there. I think of interest to me is the fact that, Aedín, you felt you had to make yourself a publicly engaged person so that rendered you visible. So the question is, how do you get to be on a commission? If it's an invite only basis, can you do anything to increase your chances of getting on that? So there's a journey. I think a lot of us take small steps and we think, oh, the small steps are not worth it. But you've got to see your impact career developing through small steps before you would get to the stage of a commission. I think then the working in the commission is an interesting forum of many ways we could impact policy. Commission is one brokering mechanism. So interesting to reflect upon your experiences of that and how influential you feel you could be on policy in regard to that. Roshin is talking about the interdisciplinary and intersectoral work. I think that skill set is seriously challenging for academics. That we've got to plug in to demographers or policy experts or tax experts, or and I think that understanding these big public problems need team science solutions, and whether we've got the competency and skill set to perform as part of team science is something that your talk raises. The volume of work's huge. It seems to have been eased by the efficiency of the chair and the fact that it was time limited. So that maybe that volume of work is worth doing if you feel as if the chair is going to do something substantial. And so, but I think that is a very significant issue, because if you feel it's getting into your time so much, we do need to think about where the rewards are. And I'll come back to that in just a second. Your experience of producing the evidence base and then making the policy recommendations, but only some of them being picked up, recognising that you're feeding into the political system, and how you manage that level of frustration. Because we're often asking, show me the impact you've had on something, and you say, well, we didn't do what I asked them to do, but the work I've done to get to the point of he's putting that on the agenda. So understanding that policy impact work doesn't often lead to policy change, but it doesn't make it any less significant. So navigating through the political landscape after you've made your recommendations, I think I could see is something that would be very frustrating, and very something that you'd have to have a sober realization from the outset of what was possible. And finally, just on your institutional support, was a final major takeaway that I took. It's clear that we do not have in Maynooth a machinery for supporting this kind of work. We don't have workload models that recognise and value the work. We don't have mechanisms for accepting payment. It's easily ingested, and that money trickles down to departments and doesn't go to the centre for the department's benefit. We don't have promotion criteria that is structured to incentivise and reward this kind of work. So it seems to me that what you're flagging is a huge personal investment wrought by your expertise, your commitment, your social conscience, your concern to deliver social value as an academic. But all of that has been unsupported, if not frustrated, as opposed to lubricated and incentivised and scaled by Maynooth. So I think we need to take seriously your experience and your journey through this as to what it flags out about the environment we need to create to incubate your kind of work more seriously. So I don't know if that sparked any reflections, or if that's a summary which resonates with your own experiences, or any further thoughts or reflections on those comments.
Well, the thing on how to get asked, I said a little bit about that at the beginning. I mean, I did not, this is not planned. I didn't say, oh, I'm going to, plot a path to policy impact. I just started being willing to do things in public that were not just aimed at a purely academic audience. So I organised, so when the Castles Review was announced, I organised a conference in Maynooth on the subject of student, higher education funding. I asked Bruce Chapman, who's kind of the world leader in this area, to come to talk. To my surprise, he said yes. I ended up chatting to him. We ended up working together. So it was really good for my research. We got a great paper out of it. But also, Bruce is really involved in policy work in lots of different countries. And he was talking to me about that. So we had a follow-up conference, which was much more aimed at a policy audience, about a controversy that arose. I ended up being in front of Oireachtas committees. So there was another piece of research done that was very poor quality, but was being taken seriously in the press, and I responded to that, and Bruce came along. Anyway, so that was my first kind of taste of policy, input, and oh yeah, the other thing was that Peter Castles came to the original conference, and he said, if you are going to be working on this, could we use your results? So I ended up feeding into it, even though I wasn't on the Castles Review group. I ended up feeding into it, and the work ended up being, and so that was the first taste. And I think that once you kind of do it once, and you realise that, policymakers don't actually want to eat you alive, they're much more grateful for your work than other academics are, you know what I mean? They appreciate the fact that you're doing, like, so I went to the first time I was at an Oireachtas committee, I was terrified, but the third time I was quite blasé about it. They're actually very polite to you and they respect you, and they genuinely want to get information out of you. So I think if you feel that you have a considered view, an informed view about a policy area, don't be scared to kind of try to publicize it a bit. And it's not that like I said, I didn't plan this, but once you try a bit and then you start being asked to do things when policymakers realise that you're kind of up for it. That's the only thing I could say. On the frustration, yeah, I did find it a bit frustrating that the recommendations weren't all immediately adopted, because it was a fair amount of work, but they weren't openly dissed either, which has happened since in another context of the Tax and Welfare Commission did a massive amount of work, and was being poo-pooed the day after publication, which now that would have killed me. So I think I'd talk to those guys about how they feel about it. I think that would have been very hard to take. Yeah, I mean, you get an insight into the policy making process that I think is helpful.
Okay. That call to action, I think, is a great place to finish, because that was really heartfelt, and I think shows the potential for researchers and academics to have an impact on public policy for the betterment of society. Because that's the whole reason that we're trying to do this. So I just want to say thanks to the two of you. It's been a delight to listen to the two of you. I think we all share that online and in person. There was the relationship that you have, and both of your personalities, the way that you can knock off each other in such a positive way, was really, really lovely to hear and to witness. So listen, thank you very, very much. Just want to say we are back here again in 2 weeks' time. Sounds like a TV presenter for the next seminar on the criminal justice open research dialogue with Dr. Aedín Doris from here and Ben Ryan from the Department of Justice. So people can still register online to attend in person or online, and very, very much welcome engagement with that, and indeed with the other series of seminars. So listen, thanks to everybody for coming along. Particular thanks to Alan Hamilton Black for all of the arranging and broadcasting and also recording, because we intend to put this up online as well. And we put Aedín's call to action just up as the 1 minute bit at the start, and so on. And look, it's been really, really good, and it's a great start. Great start to this series, but that's capturing what's happening already, and it's a really, really positive thing to do. So thanks to everybody for taking part, especially to the two of you.
Thanks,
Thanks, Brett.